Dr. Schwegel, you and I have had many conversations since I've been here 5.5 years ago, and I look at your basic one-pager here, and some things stand out to me, and that is how stubborn revenue generation has been. You compile statistics that show that revenues from 94 to 23 have averaged 17.2% of GDP, correct?
That's right.
And actually, at 23 and 24, 23 was lower, 24 is going to be slightly higher. But when you look at the stubbornness of that figure and the fact in even your own projections, you see it staying flat generally around 18%. Is that what you've got here in terms of basing long-term forecasts on?
No, that's right. And the 23 was lower because there was some revenue that got pushed from 23 into 24, the disaster declarations, especially in California, for example. The corporate minimum tax wasn't implemented. So that's why 23 was a bit lower. But as you said...
But it's been a stubborn range of between 17.5 and 18.5.
That's right.
And most of the 18.5 is projections into the future. So I want to then go to outlays. And for nearly 30 years, those were averaging around 21% of GDP. And those culminated in recent years in the $1 trillion structural deficits. Is that correct, give or take?
That's right, especially
Yes.
on the mandatory side.
And now that has doubled to about $2 trillion, give or take, in the present.
That's right.
So it gets bleaker as you make projections into the future. And revenue has been stubbornly consistent regardless of tax rate. Is that correct?
That's right. And, there have been legislative changes as revenues have gone up that have taken them back down. So there is some
But generally
legislation
that
there.
would mean once you cut taxes, you're depriving the Treasury in the short run. You might get a little better economic growth generally as you go into years 2, 3, and 4. And the reverse is true, when you raise taxes, correct?
That's right.
You're going to flush a little more into the Treasury, and then economic growth is going to go down a little bit each year. The fundamentals that basically drive our economy and our government generally.
No, that's essentially what we've got in our projections as well.
When you've got here looking at 2024, the snapshot of where we are currently, and you see that revenue is budging at most 1 point as a percentage of GDP, and you're taking spending up by 4 additional percentage points. Correct? From 23, which is 23.1, to 27.3.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure 23.1.
In 24 is what you're forecasting. Will be up on the outlay line.
20. I'm sorry. I wonder. You. I'm sorry. Since I'm the one.
I'm talking about outlays.
Yeah.
Outlays on the chart you gave me.
Yep. 24.2.
Yeah.
2024.
And then what are you showing in 2054?
I'm sorry. I gave you. I'm sorry. I gave you our long-term outlook.
Yes.
And I have our short-term outlook.
Well, okay. So, but they're close.
But you've got the numbers right.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, how do we get things right-sized? Can we do it through revenue when history has shown we've never been able to? And the cutting taxes started back many, many years ago without adjusting spending. And to me, it looks like the data is all there, that if we don't want to keep borrowing from our kids and grandkids, that we've got to choose and prioritize what we're spending here that's going to match up with what revenues have shown that we can generate over a long period of time. Do you agree with that?
Right. I mean, that is the choice in front of policymakers, that the revenues and outlays at some point have to come closer together. That can be done, as you said, on the outlay side. In principle, it could be done on the revenue side. If it's up to the Congress, you could have higher rates.
And you always say that because yours is not to advise on policy. It's just to tell us the figures.
The figures, that's right.
And the figures are bleak.
It is a daunting situation with
Okay,
rising
we'll
debt.
settle for daunting. And then I want to circle back to what the chair said earlier. Shocks to our economy, which we had to navigate through in 08, 09. That was trivial dollar-wise compared to what we spent recently on COVID. You maybe can't measure the two, but that was roughly measured around $1 trillion. What we did was over $4 trillion, and then enterprised over the last couple years, or first 2 years of the Biden administration, to add another roughly $3 trillion. So we're in a place where this, to me, looks like we end up with something like a Chapter 11 in the real world, which means sooner or later you've got to get our spending in line with our revenue. I mentioned that coming in to this hearing. A lady working here in the Capitol carrying a box of files laughed out loud when I said that, and it was in agreement. And I think that's what the American public is doing. One final thing, because don't see anybody else here, so I'd like to have a little latitude.
Go
since I
for it.
spent so much time on it. Healthcare is the place that we can, within our own means, take a broken industry and system that has no consumer involvement within it, no emphasis on prevention and wellness, and it's run by a very corporate system of healthcare that's even frustrating doctors and nurses to become a part of it, and that is doable. And unless we want government to even do more, I would ask that the healthcare industry embraces things like competition, transparency, engages every American in their own well-being so that you don't need to use the system as much, because it is approaching 20% of our GDP. And in most other developed countries, it's 10 to 13%. Would your opinion be that that would be the lowest hanging fruit of where, if we put policies into place that can actually weigh in on our current chronic big deficit?
Yeah, I'm going to switch metaphors. It's where the dollars are. It's the rising spending, and you could see that in the chairman's chart at the beginning, that healthcare spending is rising quickly. The good and the bad is that there's so many distortions in healthcare, as you said. It's hard to get at them, but there's so many dollars that even if you make kind of modest progress in percentage terms, the dollar change can be quite large.
So thanks for the latitude on time. Thanks for your answers. In summary, we've got to spend less than we take in. History shows that revenue is stubborn. History also shows that we used to have healthcare as a percentage of our GDP closer to 10%, not too many decades ago. And the rest of the world has figured out how to do that at better value. We need to start doing a few things that most Americans believe should be done. Don't spend more than you take in. And if something's out of line in terms of cost, reform it. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.